All right, I'm making a video today about a email I received, and it's about a financial modeling exam. And I found this case ridiculous. At first, I thought it was going to be really, really interesting, and then I started to work on it. What a waste of time, really, but okay. And then I realized it was incredibly unreasonable and badly written. So let's just get into this one. Now, the reason I'm doing this, I think it has some issues that are a little bit interesting. That's why I at first said, oh, okay, let's look at this one. And so I'm going to go to chapter 1 and then project finance and interview exams. And I keep updating this and collecting this a little bit more each time. And I named this one Unreasonable Example. Okay, and we'll look at, where's the size? We'll look at this exercise that this person sent me. Okay, and then they said, okay, could you look at this? And let me make it a little bit more larger. And then they, at first, this is something that's very important. Look how they set up the units and I'm pressing Control 1, and there's a little, I didn't know you could do that. Look, there's a little custom now. I think you're saying, well, get to the issues. Don't waste your time on this. I found you can steal stuff from all kinds of models. I stole that. I thought that was kind of neat, and I put that in my little generic macros. So now you just press Shift Control and the letter D, or Control and capital D, and then it'll make a little thing like that, and put the brackets around that. So good. And so they gave you, for the first thing they did, I said, oh, this is going to be okay. Look, I don't have to waste a whole lot of time putting the dates in. And then they gave you two different assets. Okay, and one was, they put the summer and winter weekend peak capacity, excuse me for not being able to say something. Now, I believe there are 4 seasons. There is also fall and spring. And so which months are you going to define as summer and winter is the first question. And then they gave you some characteristics. And let's say you're in renewable energy and you say, I don't want to do this. Okay. And then they gave you the dollars, US dollars per kilowatt per month. And they gave you something for presumably ongoing CapEx. They gave you some capacity factors, so you have to compute generation. And so I looked at this. I said, okay. I don't know about the summer and winter generation. And then they gave you some pricing assumptions, and they kind of did it across. And that's okay. That's kind of like our input S versus our input T. I said, okay. They gave you a gas price. And then they gave you a second asset, so I suppose you have to do 2 of them. And for each of them, you have a contracted level and a merchant level. So they, out of 80% of the combined cycle, CCT, combined cycle generating What is the T? Okay. Okay. God, stupid. Look at me. And then they gave you the same kind of, oh, this was 80% as well. Okay. Perhaps, just noticing that, perhaps you could have kind of combined these and then put the 80% in. Okay. And then, all right. So the first thing I thought, oh, that doesn't look that bad. And at least they gave the inputs clearly. And then they stopped putting the inputs in, and then they gave the debt assumptions. And this time, now perhaps the best thing to do will be to switch the video off. And just think about how you would do some of this. So they gave 3 different case assumptions, and then they said, okay, we're going to size it based on the USD per kilowatt, and we're going to put an interest rate. Presumably you have to put the LIBOR rate in, so forth now or whatever. And they put a very, very small amortization in. So you have to, in your debt schedule, you'd have to put that 1%. But then they had 100% cash sweep. And then they had a little bit of criteria on the cash sweep, where this cash sweep depends on the debt to EBITDA. And I thought, oh, okay, that would be fun. For some reason, they put a tenor in here. I suppose if you didn't finish the cash sweep, you could have put a fixed refinancing in year 7. Now, okay, that's all not so difficult. It's going to be a little bit, we have to compute the debt to EBITDA, and I thought, I haven't done it like that exactly before. And then below that, they had holding company debt. So the first thing you have to think about, what does that mean? Well, the projects themselves are going to produce some cash flow, and there's going to be debt associated. We'll put the debt in associated with the 2 projects. Projects. Okay. And then after that, you get some dividends. And then we can take those dividends that are produced after from whatever, we can call this our operating company, and then we can produce some holding company debt. So the first thing I thought, well, if there's 100% cash sweep, that means there are no dividends. That's what I think. But then if we get down to 75% cash sweep and 50% cash sweep, there are going to be some dividends left. And then they said 95% of loan to value. And that's normally kind of a real estate term, but the value of a project is often the value on the balance sheet, although I suppose you could put some kind of fair market value in here. They didn't give you anything, so I thought, okay, we'll use the loan to value. And then they said, 10% cash interest, 12.5% payment in kind. And that seems interesting enough because there's a different interest rate. At first I thought, the 12% is like a premium for payment in kind, but that can't be. So what happens is if you have 100% cash sweep, then we're going to not be able to pay the interest because we have no cash flow. So the debt balance is going to accrue. And then eventually, this is very much like a holding company debt, a shareholder loan. And then eventually it says 100% equity cash flow sweep, whatever that means. this is cash flow that the holding company gets, because so maybe it's really equity cash flow of the operating company. And then we're going to try to pay it off again in 7 years, which is almost irrelevant. We see if the sweep can pay it off. So, okay, so we can do that. And then they gave us a case 2, and they said, this is a project bond. So you know, when I saw this, I thought, this is going to be a little more interesting than a typical old case. Let's see if we can do this. And then they say 1.2 times DSCR on contracted cash flows. Why they kind of capitalized cash flows here and not here? Okay, whatever. I didn't notice that before. And then 3 times DSCR. So what we're going to have to do is compute the present value of, we're going to have to, in our operating company, clearly show the aggregate for the 2 projects of contracted cash flows and uncontracted cash flows. And then they gave us a nice simple interest rate. This time they didn't tell you to split it between LIBOR and not LIBOR. So the good news is, they're making you think a little bit. And then they said, but you know, when we do the sculpting, let's put $50 per kilowatt of debt at maturity, which means, now if you think about this, you take the net present value of the debt service. So you get the contract cash flows and the non-contract cash flows with different DSCRs. And what that means you have to do, by the way, is up here, if this is cash flows, when we have fixed and variable operation and maintenance expenses, up here, fixed and variable maintenance expenses, and we'll put the CapEx as fixed, then you'll have to allocate those expenses somehow to the contracted cash flow and the non-contracted cash flow. Okay, I don't know, you know, we'd have to, I suppose the term sheet would have to define how you do that. I made an assumption that we'll allocate the variable cost based on the production and the fixed based on the capacity or something. Okay, and then we think about it. Well, if you want to see how big the debt is, it's not really all that complicated. What you have to do is figure out how much capacity you have at the tenor of 15 years this time. And that is going to be direct, that's going to be a repayment. So that's going to be like a debt service. So you're going to take the net present value of this 50 plus the net present value of this plus that. So this is really an exercise in it's an exercise in sculpting the debt. Okay, and then they have holding company debt again, and this time they said 4 times average 5 years CFADS available to holding company, which is totally confusing. Is this CFADS at the operating company? Because that's the only place you compute the CFADS. It almost has to be. Or is it just the dividends that's after the debt? And you could call that CFADS available to the holding company. And I suppose you'd have to define that. And then they have a pricing, which is a higher interest rate, not that much higher. Okay. And what this means here is if we have 1.2 and 3, there's a lot of cash flow here. There's a lot of cash flow. And 6.5, and then they have no amortization, no maturity, no discussion of a cash sweep. So this, if you would look at this, this would be a perpetual bond. And I don't know. I know in the UK they used to have perpetual bonds that never ever mature and are just outstanding forever. But in this case, the project life is going to be finished one day, And you have to have some kind of repayment, having debt without some kind of repayment. So again, I thought, okay, let's see what we would do. Let's just see what we would do to solve this problem. And then they have case 3. Again, they have the contracted, non-contracted cash flows. Just to throw it in, they put a bigger maturity at the end. Remember, the NPV of this maturity is going to be added to the NPV of the debt service from these two things, and we'll take it at the LIBOR plus 3%. If that interest rate changes, the NPV calculation gets a little tiny trickier. No cash flow, and this time we had a shorter debt tenor, so the loan might be smaller, and then they put LTV back at the top, 9% cash, 10% PIK, this time 100% cash flow. So it's really a little bit of a combination of these two. Okay. So far I said, oh, that's interesting. That's okay. We can kind of understand this. This is a little more, maybe this is the way some of these transactions really get done. Maybe they're really all very fancy. Maybe we go to some kind of private equity person and they have these, and then they finally put some valuation assumptions in, and they said, okay, let's do a DCF over with a discount rate of 10 to 12%. Now, this is so interesting because these discount rates, contracted discount rates, is kind of, for me, a very high discount rate. And this is presumably a discount rate on, since it's the DCF on the total cash flow. I'm reluctant to call it a WACC, but maybe I will because you're used to calling it. Now, how are you going to put this in? What they clearly want you to do is to make a data table. And make a data table with this kind of on the side or the top and this on the other side. But then they have it's going to be confusing to make a data table because we have two different terminal values. We don't just have one terminal value, okay, and we're going to make it over 5 years. And then we're going to, then they have this acquisition price, and that's really kind of confusing because up at the top here, they have the inflation, they have an acquisition date and a refinancing date. Now, presumably you acquire these here, and then I don't know how you're going to pay for this acquisition. That's never stated. But then you're going to have a refinancing and a valuation at the exit date, which I suppose they don't really say that that's the exit date or what's the life of the assets, do they? The 2026 can't really be the valuation, the exit date. Did I put that in? Okay. So that's the first thing. And we've already spent quite a few minutes just looking at this and thinking about it, which I would spend. And now we get a little bit crazy because this is supposed to be done in 3 hours, and I don't know what if you really would get this and say this is to be done in 3 hours. Maybe I would say, this is a very interesting test. I understand the financing of it. Maybe I'll even write down how I would compute this, and then I would say, you jerk, you completely idiotic company, I don't want to work for you. You either made this test so that everybody would fail, or your people who do the modeling are some kind of masochist assholes who are idiots, basically, to put this kind of test together because it's absolutely impossible to do. And then I would kind of unfortunately, they would make you do it with your own computer or something like that, and you could almost throw it in their face and say, what kind of a company are you with these ridiculous assumptions? Probably a lot of these assumptions don't even work now. So let's go to the next step. And I'm going to show you a completed version of this. And I'm certainly not going to go through formula by formula. Now, the person who tried this, he was sitting there, and I heard some in New York, and okay. So he tried this, and here's what he did. He put this stuff up here. He left this in, and he said okay, and then I guess he put some blanks down here. And just a minute, where did this? Here we go. He put the days, and I guess he used this date up here. And we have 24 hours in a day. He put that in, nothing on the side. Hours in the month. Ooh, okay. Winter capacity. And then in here, instead of putting a flag for winter and summer capacity, there was a little and statement here, which please, obviously, I shouldn't say that. You would have to put some, what month is winter, what month is summer, and then just put a flag in and put that, and then he has some capacity factor, and he didn't say whether this was, I guess this was the overall capacity factor, which we should write down, and then he computed the generation. That's okay. And then he said the capacity base rate, but we would have to put the contracted revenues. And then he did something very smart, I think, which is to say, screw this. This could have taken an hour to do. And he said, what am I supposed to do now? Okay, but there's a lot of what not to do in this little thing. Please put it in a different sheet. Please work through and show that you're not going to make these kind of calculations, because if I was looking at this and somebody made this kind of calculation, almost immediately I would say, come on, this person, he doesn't use flags, and then the what's a input, the color was all wrong, there's no units on the side, this of course should be in a different sheet. Okay, so that's that one. So we'll close that. I didn't put that on the website. I think I put these instructions on the website. And then I wasted a lot of time doing this, and I don't know which is the latest one. I hope this is the latest one. So the first thing I did is, of course, I got some ideas about putting the units in. I thought, oh man, these guys are so fancy. And I put up here how you could do that. So if you press Shift Control 1, for example, that goes away. But if you press Shift Control D, and I can't do that with this on now because D is something taken by the video, but that's all right. So in generic macros, I guess what I did in this generic macros, and if you are too arrogant to open generic macros or think you can make your own formatting with the paintbrush yourself, I would say you're going to fail. There's no way. If you're going to go up to the file, up to the home, and every time use a paintbrush, or every time you're formatting, you're going to go here. I don't care how fast you can do it. It's not going to be as fast as it's not going to be as fast as and where's the sum? Where is the sum one these days? I don't even know. I don't even use it anymore. Whatever. But if you want to see the shortcuts, and what I did while I was working on this, I thought, okay, well, let's show people kind of how this works. So if you now go to the generic macros, sorry about this, you can see how I did the coloring input, how I did the links to the sheets, how I did the coloring of the sums, how I did the coloring of the top, and then you can look at all the shortcuts I made, which are not a big deal, okay? Some are a little trickier, for example, when you put the flags in and multiply it by 1. So you can see these, and you can steal however many of these you want, including on this one. I put that Shift-Control-D thing in there. Okay, so this is, and I keep uploading this to the website, and I never maybe have the very latest version, but if we go to this shortcuts, this is where you multiply the stuff by 1. This is where you just do a format. This is where you make the EIS and all that. And then I pressed up here. I said, well, if you want to see these shortcuts, I hope I pressed Control Alt D in the generic macros. Sorry about not remembering this. I think what I should do is Control to see shortcut added. How about added in this this generic, which is a stupid name. Some people say, no, maybe you should charge like $2 or something for people to get this. No, but I don't know. Other people say, oh, you know, the problem with your life, you're such a psychological mess, you're such an idiot. If you charge a really high price for everything you do, people will think it's valuable. Okay, screw all that. I don't know. My life's a mess, personally and everything else. Okay, now, now here's the other thing they did, and this took a lot longer. They put this. They put these inputs, but you notice they didn't put these inputs in. So the next thing I did was just say, okay, let's work through the inputs. And why did I put the inflation right up here? The inflation really should have kind of gone down to be part of this thing, okay? And there was we needed some start date for the model. We needed to put some lifetime. Where did I get the life? I can't even remember where I got the lifetime now from. I thought there was something. And then I went and looked on the internet, and it's hard to find how you define summer and winter in electricity. But basically June, July, if you're in the northern hemisphere at least, June, July, August, September, 4 months are summer and the rest are winter. I remember that from ages ago when I used to work on that in a lot more detail. Okay. Now, this, this is not exactly the truth. So once I started to go through this, you know, down here, they talk about, way down in the valuation, they talk about putting the 300 per kilowatt, 800 per kilowatt, and all that, but then they have summer and winter capacities. I assumed everything's based on the winter capacity if we have this issue, so that's all okay. But then, let's do this. When you get to these variables, this is a crazy number. This is clearly a crazy number. I'm sorry, it was a crazy number because they had per kilowatt month here, and then they have the capacity price down here as the, where's the capacity price? $3. So $3 doesn't come close to hitting, if this is USD per kilowatt per month, doesn't come anywhere close to hitting the actual capacity, the actual charge. So somebody, so when I thought, oh, they're so smart when they're doing this, I suddenly thought, oh, they're idiots. And then, just to make things really kind of crazy, down here, they put a carbon price, and they said, okay, presumably this natural gas plant would have to pay a carbon price of $2 per ton, which is nothing. I hope you all know that that's nothing. People are using 85 or 90 in kind of analyses in the incentives and the taxes, and we could look at trading, but in U.S. there's, I don't know if there's any trading. I don't know. Maybe I just don't know that. Sorry. And so then you have to go to the internet, and somewhere I need to make another video on exactly how you could take a BTU. This is a kind of nice thing where they took the BTU and natural gas and coal, and then you have this thing where you say that the tons per this is kilograms per that produced from coal is double basically natural gas. But then the big issue in the world is how many, well, yeah, I think it is a gigantic issue, I'm sorry, is how many methane losses you have. If you have 1% losses, I don't know why I put that on gasoline. If you have 1% losses, then you have to go through a little bit more. And at the end of the day, here is the coal and here is the natural gas. If you put 2%, then you get, oh my gosh, this is 0.093, and you get almost the same adder for coal and natural gas. So they didn't even give you this, and I started thinking, how much time in preparing this, if they give you a carbon price, you presumably need to put that in as a cost, and how much time are you supposed to do going to the internet and getting this data now? And then you see, oh my gosh, they put this crazy thing in here. So suddenly these brilliant people, your thing. If you say, oh, they're just trying to trick you. Oh, they're just being really smart. They're just trying to trick you. I really doubt it. I believe these masochist, horrible people are just being lazy to believe this. And then they say, okay, we have we have a capacity factor for our combined cycle of 80%. Oh my gosh, and 85% in the winter. Oh, that's a high capacity factor. That's like a total base load. Oh, and then I forgot to do this. In the inputs over here, they had a merchant gas price in USD per megawatt hour, which if you're in Germany, you use dollars per megawatt hour, but it's nothing like this. The price, I assure you, you could do a conversion of BTU to MWH. How could they put that in? I think it was just lazy, but clearly what they they meant was USD per MMBTU. Maybe the best thing to do now, I'm trying to think of what the real strategy would be to do here, is we've now been talking for almost an hour, and so we've only got 2 hours left on this, and we haven't even made it through the inputs, and we haven't even and then the next thing I did was to redo these inputs. You can put leave their little comments on the side, but we have to it wasn't as nice as I thought. They didn't really give you the inputs. They gave you the numbers, and then you had to express these as inputs. And just getting to this stage would have taken you at least an hour. Okay? And then here is the biggest problem of it all. If we go to the second asset and we take an implied heat rate and show you that you know something about electricity markets. Now the heat rate of this power plant expressed in BTUs is 6,500. If we multiply the top and the bottom by 100, we get kBTU per megawatt hour. And that's still the same number. But if we want to make the top of this 1,000 times more, then for that megawatt, we would take this and divide it by 1,000, and we would get 6.5. That's the heat rate of the unit. If you look at the heat rate, if you look at the heat rate that they put in here, now I added this and I didn't color it very nicely and all that. If you look at the heat rate, they said this heat rate that they're producing, you're earning, you could break even if you had a heat rate instead of 6.5, a horrible, horrible heat rate that has never really existed since maybe the 1950s or 60s, of 17.5, which means you use a whole lot of more natural gas and can get the electricity. Now, if you're producing at a capacity factor of 85% and having this, it's called the market implied heat rate. If you're having something like this, you're going to have an enormously high rate of return, which is what happens unless you put this kind of, assume this is $10 per year, which is a totally crazy number, and then you can't even make a profit, then you just go home, I guess. So the whole thing that looked so fancy suddenly is becoming idiotic, and maybe the best thing to do is to stop and say, okay, screw this test, okay? And then when we start working on the inputs, we know we want to use the lookup function for the debt to EBITDA, and maybe we put a LIBOR in and put just a flat rate for the LIBOR. We can't, don't start making it harder than you need to, which is another a lesson about taking these tests. Some people say, there's another case I'm going to talk about, which was refinancing a set of 3 or 4 wind farms, which was given to an intern. And the intern said, I need to compute the semi-annual interest rate and compound it. Not compound, use this 360-day interest rate on this. And that was so crazy to think you have to do something like this. Just do what they asked for at first, at least. And then they have the debt to EBITDA. And then they have a different cash flow sweep. So we can compute the debt to EBITDA using the opening balance of the debt. And the EBITDA we have from our merchant and contracted cash flows, and then we can compute what the level of the debt to EBITDA is, and when it's high, 4 and above, we want to use 100%, 3.5, and you could even say to and from and do a little bit of that, and then the rest of these you just had to waste some time putting these inputs in, okay? And we get to the valuation assumptions, and I guess these things that are going to be part of the data table, we've got to figure out how to incorporate a data table into our analysis. Now, I added one thing to make these merchant prices were so high. I said, let's at least push these down. So now I have to stop this video just for a second because I gotta go, and then I'm going to walk through just a little bit of ideas on how to do the model. Now, this model, oh my gosh, so I put the financing part in the model, the operating part of the model, it had all the flags and the quantities and the fixed and variable prices, and we put a nice little format here. And if you could do this in two days or something, I think I didn't really take it very seriously, but I said to myself, I'm not going to do this I'm not going to try to put a little timer on here and put a time constraint. I'm just going to. This seems to be an interesting enough case to just at least work through it and maybe show you kind of how the financing works. And then you notice this is semi-annual. How do we take an operating model that's monthly, convert it into a semi-annual model? And so this case, I suppose, if you correct it and then try to really work through it, if you can really do this, it's I don't know. I think you would have better things to do. I think there's really a psychological problem with me that why I even bothered with this one. But okay, so I'm gonna restart. Okay, so now let's go to I hope I'm remembering where I left off, but let's go to I think I have a different shirt on maybe. How you could set up this model. Now we're going to show you how ridiculous things are. I'd love you to give me some recommendations, because even if you could type in Excel at light speed almost, well, not light speed obviously, but how could you realistically get this done? And I've been thinking, well, maybe the best way to handle this would be to set up a little a message right at the front saying, here's how you could do the sculpting, here's how you could do the cash sweeps, and almost do a little example perhaps of some of that, and then show a little bit of how you would set up the model and say it's kind of an unreasonable example. I really, really don't know. Now, let's just walk through a couple of things. So what I did is I put an operating model and I put a couple of the financing cases, and then I had this valuation table, and in this valuation table, just using a regular data table was a little bit tricky because we have two different values of the residual value, and we have two different discount rates. So how would you kind of set up a nice little data table to get that? And then I have the emission factors here. Okay, so let's just walk through very quickly the operating model and get to the get to it. So the first thing, of course, is now I've been going around about this. I think perhaps I'm pressing Shift Control Plus. I think maybe putting the units for the model, and then the units that we take from the constant might be a good thing. So we need the dates, all that. We clearly need that, and we need when the financing begins, and this is the refinancing date and the refinancing kind of tenor. And then I put a repayment counter in, and I said, well, let's assume that this refinancing has a semi-annual period. So we put our month in and take 5 months after the first month, and then for the second month we just go backwards one, and then we just use a little bit of an or statement, and it's also got to be after the refinancing period. So that's a little bit complicated, but once you have that, then you can go back and say, okay, let's put a counter in for the dates that we want in our detailed sheet. Now, see, well, that's a pain. That would have taken me a little while to think through that and work through that, because then you can make this sheet semi-annual. You can just go to EO month 5 months after it and then add one and try that. And again, I think what I would recommend, I'm going to put this into another separate video, but what I would recommend is that you just practice these kind of basic things. First, just getting the timelines over and over again, getting a format so you can just do it like this in a second, okay? And then perhaps doing a little bit of more of this advanced SUMIF stuff to get the month by month data, which I put in this sheet, into another sheet. Then we had to look up and see when the summer months start and when the winter months start, and we can put our hours in the period. And then we begin with our operating quantities. Not a big deal. We have the summer and winter, and we have a different capacity factor, and we put a different generation in. So it's all very transparent. And perhaps just doing one or two of these things might be good, and even a heat rate, because in this case I divided it by 1,000, and then you can get from the megawatt hours, you can get the BTUs you need, and then you have the CO2 per. Oh, they didn't give you it. They gave you a carbon price, but no data. So that's another one we had to find. Absolutely crazy that you could put that carbon price in there and not put a carbon quantity. And I don't know what they expected. Are we supposed to leave it out? Are we supposed to do what I did, spend probably 15 minutes looking it up, or maybe even longer? I probably spent longer. And then we put in the project 2 and do exactly the same thing. So we start with the quantities, and then we start putting data in, and we better put in inflation in. And to show off, we can show that we know that you have to decompound the annual inflation to get it monthly inflation. They didn't show when the inflation started. We assume the gas price is in USD per MMBTU. It couldn't be per kilowatt hour, really. That would be, the gas price would be almost zero, you know, it would be 10 times less or something like that. And then we can get a fuel cost per kilowatt hour, a variable O&M, and a fixed O&M. Now, if we did this fixed O&M right now, I divided this by 12. If I would have not divided by 12, because they had the fixed units, and if I would have not divided by 12 for both of these plants, then once you get down to the free cash flow, let me, where do we have the cash flows? Just a minute. Okay, contract, just a minute. Merchant energy, see, I can't even find that. We have total merchant cash flows and contract cash flows, and every single one of the cash flows is negative. Okay, now I put a little thing where I reduced I changed the merchant price, okay, and even if we have that merchant price at 100, we get an absurd kind of a result. And where in the heck did I put the project IRR? So I don't know, because of the very first periods or something, I had a slight, tiny positive IRR if I used those annual periods. But then let's also use the annual periods for the CapEx, and I think I did that anyway. I pretended those were annual anyway. Okay, so you could have a slightly positive number if you put the excuse me. Let's find the fixed and variable O&M. If we divide it by 12, which if you don't divide it by 12, that 10 times 12 is 120 USD per kilowatt. let's see, the whole cost of the plant might be were they using 500 or 600 USD? So you've got a very big percentage of the plant as O&M, and it's kind of like a nuclear plant. If we don't put this and we leave those really high, remember excuse me, I just can't talk and do typing at the same time. If we assume this was an error and we have per kW month, then, and this is what we should look at right away, really, I had to go, then we have a 30% IRR, which is ridiculous. Now, if you stop here. This was the classic error in merchant analysis, and perhaps private equity companies, perhaps this is a private equity company, I wouldn't be shocked. If this is where you start. If you're in a competitive market and you have the ability to make 30% project IRR, this is not equity IRR, and the merchant prices are allowing you to earn that sort of rate of return, you ask what will happen. It's a simple question. And you ask if you have a viable model. If the project IRR was only 3% because those O&M expenses were so crazy, you say, this is not a viable investment. We could stop here because no matter what kind of debt we put in, we're never going to pay off the debt, essentially, especially if the gearing or the leverage is high. But if this is really high, then everybody else will come into the market. So this was so bad that I had to kind of put a little spinner box around the merchant prices to get a much more reasonable heat rate, and maybe we can start with something like a 10% IRR. Okay, maybe because we have all those really high financings. Now it could be all different, but so if you can't get this first part right, why bother with all the rest of it? And that's, for me, a big theme. If you could write up this case and then take this case, it would be wonderful if they gave you enough time and you could shove it back in there behind and say, look, you masochistic jerks. Why can't you have such basic, you can test me on the modeling and everything else, but test me on some very fundamental economic ideas, please. And you can do this. Now, I'm supposed to be teaching a university class. I'm almost now thinking about maybe give a case study on this or something, because it's really kind of interesting. Now, if you want to go through the valuation, well, okay, they had a different merchant and whatever discount rate for the merchant and the contract. Perhaps I was a little bit harsh by putting it down to 8%. Let's leave it at about 10%. Okay, and then what we can do is you get the total cash flow. It was very, very confusing as to what this acquisition period was and the refinancing period, but it seemed that they wanted a valuation from the acquisition period, and they wanted just a minute, the terminal period of 5, and we can start with some. Then they had the cost, excuse me, of the project. So there's 500 cost. If you're paying 120 in O&M and another, what was that, 5 in capex, it wasn't that much. Let's say let's say you're paying 10, but let's say you're paying 13 in month by month in O&M per month. per month, not per year. So let's multiply this by 12, and we get 156, and we take this 156 and divide it by the 500, and you're paying O&M, just fixed O&M, not including all the fuel, of course, of 31% of the capex. That's just absolutely ridiculous for a plant like this. So we can put in, now back to our valuation, that's how much we paid. So we put a valuation in, and we have to go through, when we do all our contract and our merchant cash flow, we have to go through and put our merchant prices and our merchant capacity in. And then we can take the contract capacity percent and then allocate some of the cost to contract and allocate them to merchant. Cash flow is after you have the O&M expenses, and you can allocate the fuel, of course, on the revenues, but I mean the generation, I say, of course, you have to think through this. So again, that would take time, and it's even taking me time to just explain it. But once we have the cash flow, and then we have the cash flow over a monthly period, so you would have to absolutely use a monthly discount rate, which I suppose I should have put in this one. Okay, and I don't know where. So we have where's our merchant discount rate? Just a minute. Discount rate for the merchant project. See, that would have been very bad. Oh, they should have never given me a job because of that. And then we put our value based on the kilowatts. So we have to put the kilowatts in and then get the fact that these kilowatts are monthly kilowatts. And I think I just put an average of the discount rate, but the discounted cash flow value, I did that. We have to decide how much of the leftover is merchant. And I didn't even talk about this fact that we have a PPA period that's not constant. Can you imagine this? And getting this done in 3 hours? Okay, I would love to get a comment and say, oh yeah, I can do it, no problem. I'm arrogant. I'm an Excel wizard. I'm an Excel show-off. I can do it. Oh, okay. Now, when you put these discount rates in, we want these discount rates to come to be able to create this data table. So what I did here was I said, okay, let's make a little thing here where we have different discount rates that vary and different values that vary. And instead of making our normal kind of data table, which this value then comes from the operating model, I'm pressing the, this control and this key to get there, and then F5 to go back. That's really important that you're able to do that, by the way. So where's our total value is here. Oops, I'm sorry. And this time Alt-MD. No. And then, so to do that as quickly as you possibly can, and then we go through, we get the value. And then instead of changing these variables, and this should have been maybe I should have put this is the discount, the discount rate. How about this? I'm going to move this over. Oh, I can do this because I'm relaxed now. Okay, Control D, and then this one, which is the row variable. This is the peaker residual, and this is the CCGT residual. Now, if you would have said, okay, you've got a week to finish this, maybe, okay. And then we could we're putting sensitivities on these ones, and the just a minute, and then I put the 1, 2, 3 here, but these numbers come from this. Everything's driven by a row number and a column number. Okay, we could put column sensitivity. How about this? And then we could put a row sensitivity. And in this way, we can do two variables at the same time. So in this way, this index is going to put 300 and 650 and this rate and this rate. And then the big trick is these numbers here go into the operating model. So these numbers here come from, and I'm going to do this control square bracket, these come from this. So you could get your valuation, but even that, what a pain that is. And that's before we've gotten into any financing, and I can't really keep track of the time here. I just spent 20 minutes going through that. Of course, if you would have actually done this in the model, it would have taken, I can't imagine it could have, if you could have done it in an hour, I think you would have to type really fast and think really fast on your feet, perhaps. And then we have this IRR enormous problem. So then let's get into the financing. And again, the financing, we could take two different attitudes to this, and perhaps if you responding to this, perhaps you could be polite and say, look, Mr. Private Equity asshole, oh no, Mr. Nice Private Equity man, we'd like a job at the company, and we understand what you're getting at the mall. Now, just with all due respect to you, I think some of your assumptions are completely wacko, you idiots. No, I think your assumptions could be revised a bit, and you could go through that. And then you can say, I'm going to show you how I do the flags and how I do some of these things. And then we'd have to arrive at the merchant cash flow. I'd put some of the titles perhaps in, okay? And then we can talk about the financing. And here's where we transfer the variables over. Again, I put this, I think this is my new style for the week, okay? And again, I've got a problem here. I can't press Shift-Control-D because of this. Can I do that? Okay. And we get this. The big trick here is to put a refinancing. Just a minute. Oh, I used this one. I used this one up here. So we put a initial thing, and we have a little counter for the sum if. And if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, well, when it's 1, we take this whole thing in the up here, and we find the repayment counter. Okay, so we did a counter that counts from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're summing it up over these counter periods, which I've been discussing more and more. And I think it's legitimate. Now, in this case, I said, okay, let's just get this model on a semi-annual basis. And once we have it for case 1, we can copy it to case 2 and case 3 and case 4. Okay, so that's what we have. And we're going to need the merchant and contract cash flow because we apply a different debt service coverage ratio to them. And we need some EBITDA and some CapEx. The reason we might need the CapEx is at the very end, they wanted you to compute some equity IRR, which was completely kind of ridiculous when you have such like 99, some really, really high high leverage or gearing. Okay, and in the first case, so let's just walk through a couple of these cases without going crazy, but at least show you, again, this is the good part of this case, how to think about some of these issues. So maybe let's figure out what the debt size is for the operating company. And that the first one, they just gave you a flat debt size, no problem. And we need to decide if that's winter or summer capacity because they gave us a debt to capital, okay? And then they said the loan to value is 95%. Now, if this is 95% of the total capital, that will be ridiculous. And that's the holding company loan. They cannot mean that. They can't mean that. So we take 95% of the capex here, and I'm doing this from memory now, and that means, and we take away the loan at the operating company, that means we have a holding company loan of this amount. And then they had this cash sweep business where the cash sweep was different depending on the debt to EBITDA ratio. Now, okay. Now, if you used the opening debt for the opening debt to EBITDA, which is the only thing that really makes sense, because how do you know how much you have to sweep if you've got debt at the end of the period that depends on the sweep? That would create an obvious circular reference. So you can use the opening one, and then you can just use a lookup function to say, and that's why we had to set this input up a little bit differently. Oh gosh, this is so ridiculous here. So we can find what the debt to capital is now. I think I lowered this, so we got some cash sweeps that are 100%, which means if the cash sweep is 100% at the operating level, you'll have no dividend. Again, it would be better to talk this thing out rather than just to show all the modeling. And so we have, in this case, we have a cash sweep at the operating company, and the big deal with the cash sweep is it comes down. You don't know the cash sweep until you've made a little waterfall at the project company, and we start with our cash flow that we aggregated. We subtract the interest we have on this facility, and this was this 1% repayment. I should have subtracted this 1% repayment. Oh no, I'm sure I wouldn't have got the job. Okay, so I should have done that. But by this time I was getting really angry already. Okay, we can put that in, and okay, I'm not going to bother. I'll leave you to do it. And then you have so what's left over is we have 100% cash sweep, and we're seeing how fast we pay it off, and after a few years, finally we get to pay it off, and then we have all our cash flow left. So the cash flow, the dividends, you could compute the IRR even at the operating company, would be based on this kind of equity cash flow. And then you'd put in the operating company, and the interesting part here is that we have in our balance, we have some payment in kind interest. And the way I did this, at least, was to put in semi-annual interest and evaluate below, we evaluate whether this interest could be paid. If the cash sweep is 100%, we can't pay it. And if it cannot be paid, we have to pay an extra 2.5% on the interest. So this payment in kind becomes here. And so you finally can compute, is it payment in kind or is it cash? And this payment in kind here, again, should have been, I should have added the premium. So I made another mistake here. But at least you can well, I don't mind admitting I made a mistake, but whatever. We can see kind of how this could work, and then you make another cash flow waterfall, and you see if there's negative cash, we have zero cash, and we have to try to pay our cash interest. If I just did a maximum of the amount of cash interest we could pay, or zero, so eventually we get a little cash flow. Ooh, and then we can pay off all of our interest. Okay, maximum of the and this maximum of the 79. Just a minute. Ooh, Victor 79. Oh, this one or zero. So that's if I just made it all payment in kind or all cash. You could have got a little fancier, I suppose, and see how much you could pay in cash and payment in kind. I didn't do that. And so you finally can sweep the cash flow for that holding company at the very end and put it in a very similar thing, but you have to accrue the payment in kind interest at the top. Oh, and that's just one of the refinancing methods. Now, really, and then finally we need to compute the IRR and the equity, and I did that because we put extremely small equity investment in, and then we get this cash flow kind of for a while at the end, and you can see what the IRR is, but these private equity people don't even like the IRRs anymore. They like the fancier stuff, okay? And so that's just case one. And then equity IRR over some holding period I put as 51%. In the second case, okay, again, what I did is just took this case one, copied it, and we could use a lot of the same analysis. Now, trying to make some if statements would have been absolutely absurd here. Okay, and I don't know what I would have done. Maybe the best thing to do would be to put a little write-up as a response after you've gone through the inputs and after you've thought about this. Here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to send you this file. You can have your timer and ask me to send this file within 3 hours. I'm not going to be able to send it to you. But since these time pressures are absurdly arbitrary, and since obviously the complete asshole jerk off who made this stupid test in the first place was a complete idiot and didn't try them. Oh no, you've got to be polite. Sorry, you've got to be polite. We're going to request. We're going to do it correctly, and we're going to take our time, and we're going to check it out, and we're going to give it to you anyway. If you don't look at it, oh, screw you, you jerks, you jerk-off idiots who I wouldn't want to work for anyway. Oh, no. Maybe you could give me a chance to explain. Okay. So we have a different DSCR this time, and we need to keep track of both our contract and merchant cash flow. And then when we do our interest rate, we have to make sure and begin the NPVing for the interest rate right at the date you're going to start it. So that's why we use this little flag, and then you can get the PV of the debt service from that part. But then they also said, oh no, we have some debt service from debt to kill from the residual whatever at the tenor, and you can just multiply the debt to capital by the amount of kilowatts, or in this case megawatts, I guess, and then you can plop that amount right over here, and then you go down here and compute. I use the sum product and divide. You can divide it and multiply it, whatever you want to do to get the NPV correct. But when you get the NPV correct, you can then size the debt as this PV of this amount plus this amount, which gives you 847, and you stick that amount right in the period right before you start to repay it, and then you do all the interest. I just did this on a half-year basis. If somebody would be idiotic and stupid and crazy enough to say, oh, let's do it on the 360-day year, and oh, that crap, okay, I hate it. You could do it like that. I just did it like this. And the nice thing is, oh, and we better show this because that's what everybody does. They show a little single line. I don't know why they like that so much. But if you're from New York, you better do that. I'm sorry. I think this test was from New York, which is not surprising. And then we get our closing balance with our little repayment in the final period. And in this case, they said there was no cash sweep. Okay, and then we have the holding company situation again, and this time the holding company was 4 times multiple of some kind of cash flow, which was very ill-defined for 5 years. So we put a little flag here that goes through the 5 years, and we multiply that amount, and we get a debt size. And this is the one where they didn't say whether there's this debt ever gets repaid. And of course it has to get repaid, so at the holding company we can put a cash flow sweep in, and this time it's nice. And I didn't do a test here. See, I did another mistake because this cash flow sweep comes from down here, and this repayment is, where did I do this? L40 plus L41. Oh, this is the project company, and then we get to the holding company and the cash flow waterfall at the holding company, and this should have been minimum of. This should have always been a positive number, and y minimum of. What's 87? The holding company debt. I need to put a positive value from my holding company debt. I don't know where this came from right now. I obviously ran out of time. Holding this was where we had no holding company debt because there was too little, and so I should have put, I suppose, a minimum in here, a maximum rather, of this, or 0. And the reason for this is if we put, with the cash flow being lower, we didn't have enough cash flow to get any the cash flow from the other debt was too low, so now we have some holding company debt, and it's all there. I suppose we could have put that in, and then we have I skipped over that if you noticed. And then we'll have this one, and Shift Control Plus. Did I do that? And Control C, Alt EST. Okay, and this one essentially we also had the different. We had a different residual value, we had the NPV, we had the contract debt service. This had a much shorter tenor, so we got a different value of the debt service, and we get a different value of the interest, and we put our project cash flow in and our holding company cash flow in, and oh my God. This, I'm stressed out, even though I'm never going to take an interview and have an interview test ever, even though I wasn't tested out on it, even if I would never dream of thinking it, just working through it and seeing what some idiot asked for is incredible. But I hope you can see, on the other hand, if you start thinking about some of these issues, everything from the merchant price to the project IRR to our valuation to how we make the data table to how we do debt sculpting if we have some other terminal, whatever, other debt repayment at the term for the payment in kind interest being different than which is like a default, basically, the payment in kind. So it's almost like having a default interest that's different from our cash interest. Working through all of that, okay, if you've got a few days to do it, good. And maybe if you could really get completely comfortable with that and really get comfortable with more importantly the thought process, and please, all of our basic stuff about formatting and all that is so important. Now, if you're watching this for the first time, please don't freak out. I hope you won't freak out because I'm going to make another video. I don't know when. I run out of time. I've got real projects to work on. I've got real classes and I'm teaching, and I can't get enough time to put my classes online right now, which I'm going to do. I promise. And we're going to have some kind of sessions, open kind of sessions. Oh, well, I used to call it open sessions when we went skating in the 70s. Okay. I'm going to put some simple examples, and what I suggest you do instead of if you really feel like you're so good at the simple examples that you don't have to go through them, then you're arrogant. Then you're too arrogant, by the way. I would suggest making a really simple, going through my very simple example, doing it really quickly, over and over again. Quickly. Format perfectly. Structure perfect. Format perfect. Quick, simple annual models, simple sculpting, simple sources and uses, simple IRRs. Go through that really quickly over and over again, and then start adding a little bit more complexity, perhaps the summation and a little bit of month by month, sum to semi-annually. Do that with sum if over and over again, sum if over and over again. Then once you've practiced that and get really so ridiculously comfortable with format, structure, speed, all of that, try it many times, not just one time. If you just try it one time, it's almost useless. Many times. Go and do it again and again. I'm sorry you don't have enough time to do that. Maybe you can go to the bar and do it in the bar or something like that. I don't know when you can do it over and over again, but just keep practicing, get really fast at it. That will help you in your job. And then you can start to think about the more complicated issues, and then maybe after the next one, practice a circular reference and do it fast, really fast. This horrible, disgusting, shitty, horrible, I hate copy and paste method, but do it again and again and do it really quickly, and do it for a standard IDC fee, a circular reference, and then do it for the other one. So I'm going to make I've given you the introduction to the next video, but you haven't made it past all of this video. Nobody's here by now anyway. Okay.